Join Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, on a journey into creativity and transformation. Each episode, Marc and his guests explore the intersection of science and spirituality to uncover ways to live a more inspired life. Together, we'll navigate both the seen and unseen realms to spark joy and personal growth. This is a community where you are empowered to discover the diamond within. Marc is an award-winning psychic medium, decorated veteran, and teacher based in Seattle. Using his intuitive gifts, he guides the curious on profound soul adventures. Now, here is your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my beautiful community, wherever you're at in this world of ours. Welcome to Inspired Living, where we like to say you are both the inspiration and the inspired. So let's embrace this journey together. Let's inspire others, and let's make every moment count before we expire. Welcome to Inspired Living, where each moment presents a chance to ignite your passions, explore your curiosities, and embrace the many wonders of both the extraordinary and, yes, the ordinary, the paranormal, which becomes normal, and science fiction that eventually becomes science fact. I'm your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, thrilled to guide you on what I like to call soul adventures filled with creation, inspiration, motivation, and most importantly, discovery for the human experience and life's journey. Together through this show, we'll uncover the unique diamonds within each of us while revealing the many wonderful hidden gems waiting to shine in our lives and around the world. Whether you're at home, at work, or on the road, anywhere life takes you, Inspired Living is crafted to uplift and recharge your spirit and to empower your dreams. Here at Inspired Living, it's all about building a supportive community where we celebrate every victory, no matter how big or how small. Each episode features incredible guests who have faced challenges, loss, failure, defeat, but have persevered and pursued their passions, their goals, and motivations in making a positive impact in their respective fields and making our world a much better place to be. You can expect engaging discussions, perspectives, thought-provoking questions, and actionable steps to transform and manifest inspiration into your reality. I always want to say a big, huge thank you to our global community around the planet for all what we call our inspired listeners, both locally and abroad, because you have now, through your support, through your listening, through your downloads, through your subscribing, leaving reviews for us, Inspired Living is now voted as a top choice for inspiration, introspection, spirituality, and we're truly humbled and grateful for each and every one of you when you tune in on what we like to call Wisdom Wednesdays. If you have not yet subscribed or liked or followed the show, there's always still time to connect, and it's time to do so. You can follow us over on our Inspired Facebook page. Just look for Inspired Living. You can also follow us on Instagram, Blue Sky, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Just look for the handle Inspired for us. That's the number 4. And you can also stream us through Alexa, through Audible, or wherever you get your favorite podcast from. So as I like to say, let's get ready to be inspired, uplifted, and motivated, because the best is always yet to come. So let's go prospecting together through body, mind, and spirit. And we hope you enjoy the show. And before I bring our special guest on today, she's joining us for the first time. She's our second guest here through the Om Times television studio, so I'm excited to talk to her. She's coming in from Tampa. But before I bring her on, I want to read an opening from her book and give a little bit more detail about her. And she starts off with her book, and now that we're on the television platform, I can actually show you this as well. But it starts off with, put your hand on your heart every morning and feel its beat. It's your reminder that you're alive, that life is still choosing you. Your heart is the most important muscle in your body. It works without pause, the most devoted rhythm you'll ever know. Start there in gratitude. And that's from Adriana Martin. And that's how she opens her book called HeartPrint, Unlock the Wisdom of You. And her name is Meg Tuohey, and she's going to be coming in. She also has a top podcast, and I want to read a little bit about her. You can follow the details on all of our social media pages or here through Om Times Media as well. And just a little bit background about Meg and what she has done. And she's got a, let's see here, got it all written up here. She's got a top 15 in education podcast in the United States, and it's called Wisdom Stripes. And it's reached over 1.8 million lifetime downloads and ranked in the top 15. She's extending her impact through long-form conversations centered on wisdom, relationships, and personal growth. Meg's work has supported thousands of women and couples across the United States and Canada, particularly those who felt unseen or unsuccessful in traditional therapeutic or self-help environments. Her perspective is a neurodivergent, affirming, and we'll get into that because I'm not sure what that is, ethically grounded and rooted in a deep respect for women's agency and inner authority. As her leadership continues to evolve, Meg is expanding her work beyond the clinical space and into authorship, media, being here on Inspired Living, and speaking. Also in 2026, she's debuting her book. Again, it's called HeartPrint, Unlock the Wisdom of You, and extending her mission to support women worldwide in reconnecting with themselves and shaping lives rooted in meaning, resilience, and self-trust. And she always says, inspiring women, inspiring lives. And what better fit to have her come on and share the next hour with us. She's also an innovator and a psychologist, and she is revolutionizing marriage repair as her work centers on helping women reconnect with themselves, understand their inner world, and lead with clarity and wisdom, especially in moments, especially now with the way this planet is going, but especially in moments when life, relationships, or identity feel fractured. She likes to help women reconnect and move through trauma and crisis and lead with that wisdom. And so, Meg Tuohey, I'd like to welcome you into the studio. Come on into Inspired Living. Let's have a inspired chat. So good to see you. Hopefully I covered all of the basics, including your website, which is megtuohey.com, if I have that correct. And welcome to Inspired Living.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. What an introduction.
Well, you're very welcome. So tell us about the book. Tell us about your background as a psychologist working with couples. I'm going to ask you a question because I've been married for 30 plus years. So I'm going to ask, what can I do for the next 30 years to make sure my wife wants to stay with me and keep that inspiration and that spark going in marriage, because marriages, are hills and valleys, right? And, every marriage has its ups and downs, and it's not always the happily ever after that we always see in the movies and read about in the books. But I liked how you opened up your book about just put your hand on your heart and every morning and feel its beat. That's so important, to be in the present moment. It helped me really be present as I was reading the book. I'm like, you know what? That today is a gift. I'm actually here. I'm breathing. I'm alive. I'm having this interview with you. But just tell the listening audience a little bit more about yourself.
Oh, thank you. So I am a psychologist. I specialize in women in relationships that are in crisis and everything else has failed. And I work with them, but never meet their beautiful, good man or loved one. I only ever work with the woman, which is an unusual, kind of groundbreaking approach. Lots of people have picked it up since I started in 2018. But back then it was very novel. So there's that piece of what I do. I also have a specialty area in neurodivergence, as you referenced. And I took that idea and then went to wisdom. I'm very interested in the intergenerational transfer, or lack thereof, of wisdom. And so I wanted to create a podcast that allowed wisdom that was hard earned, the kind that you get your military stripes because you came through the other side, or you get your gray hairs because you figured it out. So that's the wisdom stripes. And I wanted to interview all different kinds of wisdom, because wisdom is in every kind of pocket of the world in which we inhabit. So I'm particularly curious about that and translating that so that other people don't have to suffer as much, because we can collectively grow together. So that's the podcast. And we did 1 million downloads in 2025, which is just so cool. And then finally, HeartPrint came out on February 14. It has been a labor of love. It took me 5 years to write, and it is written for those who want to know their inner wise woman's self, their inner wisdom, so that they can kind of connect to that thread of intelligence and guidance, so that when they're at those decision points in life, they can decide with that kind of deep knowing, that wisdom of what is my next right step, so that I live a life that matches my essence of who I really am, which of course is different as a fingerprint, which is why it's called HeartPrint, for every single person. There is no one else just like you.
Yeah, and I like how you equated the wisdom stripes for your podcast. And congratulations. I definitely get that when people download and leave reviews that you're reaching some sort of audience, that you're making a difference in this world, and that's why I wanted to talk with you. But the wisdom stripes, because I did serve in the military, so I had to go through to get those stripes. I do have a little bit more gray hair than I used to, being through the journey of life and consciousness. But let's start real
Yeah.
quick, because I think marriage, like I said, I've been married for 30 plus years now. And from your perspective, Meg, as a psychologist, have you seen that the construct of marriage itself, because people get married for many different reasons, right? Sometimes it's for love, sometimes it's for
Yeah.
support, sometimes it's for balance and family, or it's, I actually know, I actually have friends that were in arranged marriages coming from different countries.
Hmm.
So from your
Hmm.
perspective, how has marriage changed since you start from when you first started doing this work to what you're doing now? Have you seen a change with the younger generations? Because I read a lot of different medical peer reviews about psychology and how the younger generations aren't necessarily engaging like they used to when I was growing up. And that whole
Mm.
concept of marriage is not necessarily there with the younger generation. So I wanted to start off there and just kind of see where this takes us.
Let's start. I think the most wonderful statistic to sort of show you the progress that has been made since I started work with couples in 2017 and really went all in 2018 to couple with the kind of relationship expertise. And in 2017, the research was that it took an average couple in crisis 6 years to get help. And that was the gold standard of research. That's what we knew, and that was a legitimate measurement. Fast forward to 2024, and the same research institute was able to now 2.5 years. So actually, what we're seeing is people are more committed than ever to figuring things out, getting external help, and repairing and building relationships. Even if they don't work out in the long run, they're doing the work earlier. And so I think actually we as humans are really good people trying harder and harder to solve these complicated psychological puzzles. And so I have a lot of hope for humanity.
Yeah, I do too. And I just, I remember back when, before I got married, one of the things we had gone to our pastor, we were in a church, and we actually did a year's worth of pre-marriage counseling to understand. And I remember one of the things that always stuck with me, even all these years later, being in a marriage. And like I said, marriages are hills and valleys, and you have your ups and your downs. But I remember through that counseling, which we still reflect to this day, we still talk about it. We bring in our learned behaviors from our family. And there was a show at the time, I can't recall the name of the show, but it's like the couple was sitting in bed, getting ready to go to sleep, and on each side of them was their parents and their aunts and their uncles. Not more just mindful, like you bring in all of your personalities into that bed and all of your learned behaviors, and that's always kind of stuck with us. Like we remember that they're just the two of them in the bed, but it's actually a pretty crowded space with all of the things that we bring into a marriage and the perspectives. And I think that was very helpful. I think it's helpful before people get married to, because you have that dominance factor too, right? You come in, some marriages I know, like Jenny and I, we never lived together before we got married. I went into the military, the Coast Guard, and then she joined me. We got married, and then she joined me, and so we had to learn about living together, which took some time. Maybe not 6 years, but there was definitely understanding the different dominances of things that we learn as we're growing up and through the ego mind. But today, I read a lot of studies about, especially with technology, we're so connected. We're more connected than we've ever been in the history of the world, but we're also more disconnected than we've ever been based on our smartphones and our, there's always that, hey, I'm inviting people over to sit and look at their phones. You want to come over? And so you see this disconnection as well. And like I said, I follow a lot of different things for the show and to talk with guests like yourself. But where do you see technology interacting with marriage and people actually being able to sync up through the technology platforms? Because I didn't have this growing up, right? I always say I'm BC, before computer, right? So you either went to the bar or you went to church, or somewhere in high school. Those were your three options. How do you see, the hope of moving forward with relationships? Where do you see that future blossoming moving forward?
I think it's a great question. And I think, like any new paradigm shift, which technology is, there's often a pendulum swing. So sometimes we go from not having anything at all the way through to perhaps overusing it or having too much of something before we eventually settle somewhere in the middle, once we're sort of acclimated to it as a society. So I suspect technology, where it's still in the upswing and figuring that out, and some things technology has done for us have changed the world for the far better. And some things, probably things will adjust as we see impact and understand more about what it means. Humans have been doing these sorts of massive changes, though, since we began. We don't have to go back too many years to see the Industrial Revolution and what that did to us. Like, it is an information revolution in a way. And so we will find things that are blessings, and we will find things that we will need to address and change, and we'll do some harm and we'll do some good. And that's sort of the way in which humans typically have operated historically.
Yeah, and in your book, you open it up with chapters, but you take your chapters and you put it to an age as well. So chapter 0, age 0, and you talk
Mm.
about the delivery room in the Vibra Hospital in Massachusetts, and the story begins. Take our listeners on that journey of how the chapters are based on age and how we grow to eventually become into a relationship through marriage.
So the thing about the book is that chapter 0 is when our protagonist, our wonderful character Ellie, is born. And the rest of the chapters in the book I don't think, line up with her age, but it does start that way. And so what we see with Ellie is she's born into a pretty difficult human context, as many of us are. We come into life and we don't know what it is, and we don't know who it is that are going to be our parents and what that context means. Like, I got to be born in Australia. What if I was born in a different country, in a different culture, in a different time? And so what we see is her entry point into her context, and it's challenging from the start. And then we watch her journey across the chapters, and we see her wrestle with the things she inherited, like that lovely bed analogy you gave, the things she inherited, and then the life that she also kind of has to grapple with. And we're watching her move far away from her inner wisdom and then reclaim that relationship with self. And she does it with the help of what I call your wise woman, or your good man, or your wise person, Elizabeth. And essentially, Elizabeth is that inner voice that really understands who we're meant to grow into and wants to partner with us. And in that partnership, we then start to build a life that matches who we really are.
Yeah. So like in chapter 2, what I was saying was the age doesn't necessarily match up with the chapters, but chapter 2, age 17, and you talk
Yeah,
about that coming of age. That's pretty.
yeah.
I remember my wife talking about how that was a very difficult time for her. Kind of that you're getting to the part where you're almost too old to be a teenager, but too young to be an adult, and kind of in this little this area. So chapter 2 then jumps to age 17 in the book, and as you're laying out this emotional blueprint, what would you say to somebody that's listening to the show today that's maybe of that age and surrounded by all these different things? I mean, it's almost like with you talked about the age of information. It's almost, to me, it's almost like drinking from a fire hose. There's just so much information, so much coming at us compared to when I was growing up at that age. What would you say for the wisdom of a young woman coming into age, that age 17, and trying to understand herself and understand her place in this world?
Mm. Well, a couple of things. Chances are she comes from parents who, like you and me, didn't grow up with computers. So there are still translators available for what life looks like offline. And the curiosity is our first line of defense against anything. How did that work? What does that mean? How different is my life to your life? Whenever we get really curious about differences, that's often where a lot of wisdom lies. And when we're in any kind of age or stage of life, we are only there for a fleeting, brief time before the next season will come through. And I guess for someone who's in that 17 cusp of, transitioning into early adulthood, it's a tumultuous time. And looking for that eldership is a really good idea. And looking for the development of a deep friendship with self is a really good idea. And so we're looking for parents, we're looking for aunts or leaders or people who can be in that eldership space for you. And we're also looking for you to start to cultivate a deep friendship. So, what we know about a friendship is it takes 100 hours to build a solid friendship with somebody. And that 100 hours is also required for the relationship we have with self. And so we need to start cultivating that inner experience of being a dear friend, because who else is going to be with us from cradle to grave?
Right.
Really, it's us.
It's us. Yeah. It's who do you talk to the most in your life? Yourself, right? Um, that I like that, looking for eldership and friendship with self. I think I wrote those down because I learn a lot from doing this show as well. I learn from experts like yourself, and carry that on into my own journey and to my own followers and my students. And one of the things I always remind people, especially when I'm talking to somebody younger, yes, you may be faster than me, but we know the path a lot better. And so making
Mm.
that sync between, the youth, I'm still playing basketball as an old guy, trying to keep up with these young guys. And they're always, come on, old man, keep up. And I'm like, yeah, I may not be as young as you and you may move faster, but I know the game a lot better, right? I can see things. And so I like those two things. And one of the, you started in 2017 with this work. So you came up right against COVID, right? Which was global, impacted everybody, right? And big shout out. You said you're from Australia, so big shout out to Australia because they just enacted laws. We were just talking about the age 17 on social media. Social media, I think, in the future
Yes.
is going to really start to give us some pause about how we interact through social media. In fact, there was just a big lawsuit here that a jury awarded 325 million against Facebook because of the algorithms of what they're doing. But big shout out to your country down under, because they've enacted laws for 16 and younger can't be on the social media platforms. And I think that's brilliant, because in your book, Ellie jumps to chapter 3. All of a sudden, she jumps from 17 to the age of 28, and now in a much different place. But before we go to our first break, just tell us a little bit of that jump. Was the book written based on your journey, or is this story more, or is it a blending of both? I guess, is it kind of writing? You said 5 years to write it, so is it based on your events? Okay, and so 5 years to
Oh,
write it.
so no, I was just nodding with your like, is it a blend? Yes, it's a
Okay,
blend. So
okay,
some of it's lived experience, but
okay,
I've worked with 5,000 women now. So a lot of it are the synthesis of what I see women go through. And and so a lot of it is informed by my kind of work as well, and trying to make stories within the book
okay.
applicable so that everybody can find themselves in the story. Yeah.
Find it relatable. Um,
Hmm.
so 5 years to write the book. You jump to chapter 3, age 28. That really kind of just getting grounded now in who she is and what she's doing. Um, I guess for the HeartPrint, I like the title of it. Did you come up with the title, or did your editors come up with the title?
No, I did.
You
Yeah.
did, okay. Because I've talked to a lot of guests, and sometimes it's not, they come up with the story, but then the title is actually sometimes based on what the editors, might think is a better sell. Or so I think that's important, especially if it's your baby, you've named it, you've called it, HeartPrint, Unlock the Wisdom of You, which I think is brilliant. And one of my favorite shows, based on psychology and based on counseling and in marriage. One of my favorite shows right now that we love watching is on Apple TV called Shrinking. And
Yeah.
it's all based on relationships. And
Yeah.
Harrison Ford, obviously I'm a Star Wars fan, so big Harrison Ford fan, Han Solo. But he is in his he's in his later stages of life, but he's so brilliant as a psychologist and what he brings to the audience. I think it just is really resonating with people about, when I was growing up, you didn't go to a psychologist. If you went to a psychologist, that meant that there was something wrong with you, right? Or there was mental health issues. But we're having these conversations, which I think in one of your chapters, you talked about awakening and transparency. I think that's very important for the human consciousness and the human condition to, especially to have a relationship and to move into that marriage. So I'm going to pause here because I want to take us to our first break. And then when we come back from that break, I've got some questions, and we'll dig a little bit more into your book and ask some more fun, inspiring, encouraging, motivating questions for you. But I just want to say thank you for being on. It's a real pleasure to talk with you today and be our second guest on the Om Times television, because we've done audio for 10 seasons, just regular podcasts, and now we've moved into the TV format, which will also be the podcast format wherever you get your favorite podcast. So people get to see you and they'll get to hear you. But we're going to go to our first break, and when we return, we have our special guest today, Meg Tuohey, talking about her new book, HeartPrint, Unlock the Wisdom of You. So stick around. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Om Times TV. Billions of people walk this earth, yet there is only one you. Life offers endless connections, lessons, and moments of awakening. Are you ready to explore the beauty of this world, the healing energy that surrounds you, and your own soul adventure? Marc Lainhart, known as the Intuitive Prospector, is a trusted guide on that path. An internationally recognized psychic medium, medical intuitive, and spiritual advisor, Marc blends experience with heart-centered insight. From decorated veteran and first responder to teacher, minister, author, podcast host, and mentor, his journey has been one of service and discovery. His mission is simple: to help you awaken, heal, grow, and uncover the diamond within while discovering the hidden gems life has placed around you. Dare to explore. Dare to rise. Learn more at marclainhart.com and discover the Intuitive Prospector online.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
All right, welcome back, inspired listeners. We have our special guest today, Meg Tuohey, talking about her new book, HeartPrint, Unlock the Wisdom of You. So let's get into some questions. Yeah, show it up. We've got TV now. Before I used to just say it. I'm so used to, after 10 years of being on the air, I it's like when I was saying follow us, inspired for us. I'd be like, that's the number 4, because I couldn't show the number 4 when I was talking in audio. But in the book, throughout the chapters, as the chapters go up, the age increases. But you also have a what you call a cup of tea with Meg, and break down some bullet points within each chapter. Tell the listeners a little bit about that, a cup of tea, because I'm actually drinking tea today, a cup of tea with Meg. So I'm actually having a cup of tea with Meg, I guess. So tell us
I
about that.
mean, I love it. So I'm a big tea drinker, and so that's probably where it comes from. That's a piece of me in the book, and each chapter has the story of Ellie, who we see from the age of 0 all the way through her life. And then it has Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is Ellie's wise woman, that inner wise woman. And she's there to translate the wisdom of what's happening in the human experience. And the thought is for those who can't access or are unsure if the inner voice they're hearing is their wise woman, then Elizabeth is there to step in for a little while whilst we connect the reader with their own inner wise woman, good man, wise person. And so I write a little bit at the end of that chapter. So there's sort of 3 segments to a chapter. And I am a really good question asker. And what you'll see is at the end of each of those chapters, we've covered some very interesting human terrain. We've had it translated from a wisdom perspective. And then I give some prompts to help the reader be able to apply it to their own experience of life. And so there's only a couple of questions, but that's what they're there for. It's sort of a part self-help, part workbook, but mostly story and translation.
Yeah, which to me, storytelling is so very, very important, and that's why I like this book, because it blends. So would it be fair to say that Elizabeth is her higher self, if we were talking from a consciousness, spirituality perspective? Would it be her higher self of connecting to that older, wiser soul, if you will, for Elizabeth? Is that fair to say, or no?
I think so. I think we have lots of different words for
Yeah.
that inner knowing. And
Mhm.
sometimes we use higher self, higher consciousness. Sometimes we say, I felt it in my gut.
My God,
And
trust
it's
God.
sort of, it is that inner knowing. And
Yeah.
I'm using the metaphor of Elizabeth and the wise woman and that thread of connection that is available to all of us.
Yeah. And the reason I point that out, because our global audience has, like you said, there's a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different labels. So I wanted to kind of crosswalk that and bridge that together, because before the show, I was holding up the card. Now I can do it. I was talking about know thyself, right? And that's a big part of our journey is, self-observation and awakening, self-understanding and enlightenment. Even science is teaching us more. I technically got married at a very young age. I was 23 when I got married, and my wife Jenny was 21, about to turn 22. And I think people look back at that today and go, "That's pretty young." And with some of the studies that I follow, they talk about, especially from a man's perspective, we don't really reach maturity until our early to mid 30s, right? And you're just still trying to, we're talking about knowing thyself. But even for both male and female, they're saying that maturity really happens more in the 30s, and then you really start to get into that more mature side in your 40s. You're not over the hill, because when I was growing up, when you were over 40, you were over the hill. And now we're learning that that's not necessarily the case with people living longer, right? And so, for people that are watching the show or listening to the show, is there a certain age you should get married or not get married? Is age even a conversation that, when like when I knew, but people would say, man, you've been married for 30 years. You're young. Well, I got married young. Some people wait later in life to get married. What would you say to that, just that question on age and marriage?
I think the most tricky part of being in a human suit is that we have a biological clock when it comes to having children, particularly as women. So from that lens, there is a very real end time to when we can participate in reproduction. And that is something that we've come a long way in terms of technology supporting pregnancy later in life, which wasn't a thing 30 years ago. And there's still that reality for women. If we're just looking at relationships, though, I'm going to use the word attunement. And attunement is one of my key go-tos, which is all about how do I translate what is good for me? So if we were talking about you and me as a couple, Mark, and we were dating and wondering, should we get married, for example? then both of us need to be in attunement with what is good for us. Are you the person that is a good person for me? Am I in a space where I'm ready to commit to you? Those kinds of questions we need to ask ourselves, and we do that through the process of attunement. And attunement is about building and strengthening that thread of connection about what are my goals, my dreams, my outcomes for this life? What are my values? And what does success look like to me? And only when I've sort of processed those things can I decide whether, through attunement, whether marrying you is a towards move, it moves me towards my goals and dreams, or is it an away move? It moves me away from my goals, dreams, and values. And I'm the only one that can really tell you that. And you're the only one that could really tell me that. And so it is with any relationship. So we do have other contexts to consider. For example, having children and that biological clock. And perhaps there are other things as well. You know, you touched on some of those earlier. Sometimes there is a context where you need to get married in order to sort of stay alive or to stay in a space of safety of some description. And sometimes getting married is going to take you away from being safe. So there's always someone's context. And we always have a choice. We might not like our choices, but we always have a choice. And that attunement is about what are my choices? Where am I? And does this line up for me? That's going to be good for me. Because if it's good for me and it's good for you, then we're moving well. But if it's not good for you and it's good for me, then we're going to be on the back foot as well. Do you see?
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the word attunement because that crosses so many different playing fields. You know, when attunement, I've never thought about it that way in asking the question. And you know, kudos to the younger generations because I think they're much more aware in having that attunement and asking those questions. What does success look like? You know, if we were to get married, what does success look like? Is it a step forward or is it a step back? You know, when I was growing up, and again, I'm dating myself here a little bit. We really didn't have those conversations. It was kind of like you either went to college or you went off in the military or you got married. It was kind of like that next step, right? And it was one of those three steps. And people, you know, the younger generations seem to be asking those questions like, what does success look like for me? And what can I learn in this journey before I actually attach myself to somebody else through that concept of marriage? And so, you know, big shout out to all of my younger inspired listeners out there, because you're thinking through it, like you said, Meg, through attunement. But also, I think that's a big part of know yourself, to know thyself and have those conversations. Because Jenny and I have many conversations like, if the scenario was different compared to what we know today, would we have gotten married as young as we did, or would we have dated longer, right? We got married quickly because I got moved away in the Coast Guard. So it was like, oh, I want to take you with me, so let's get married, right? But we've had these conversations about, you know, what, you know, things that she could have maybe done differently, like gone to college. She, you know, we were part of the generation that was the online college, which was always told to us from, you know, pundits and experts, oh, online college will never take off. It'll never be accredited. It'll never work. Well, let's jump, you know, two decades, 3 decades forward. We know that it's very successful. And I've actually taken classes at Stanford and Harvard online, right? So who would have thought that? But, you know, this emotional blueprint that you talk about, you know, one of the questions I have for you, Meg, is, you know, how it forms. But you talked about why healthy love can initially feel unfamiliar or boring. And I wanted, you know, for the listeners out there, because, you know, like I asked you, how after 30 years, how do you keep love from not becoming boring? How do you keep, you know, what are maybe some attunement tools that I could do, even as somebody that's been married as long as I've been, to recreate the honeymoon, to recreate, you know, because life does get ordinary. And on this show, we talk about the extraordinary and the ordinary. But from your, you know, your education, what do you help people with that's been married for a long time versus somebody that's just getting married? What would be some of the questions or some of the exercises that you would take us through to help keep that spark, the rekindle? Because life does get in the way. Life happens, right? And you, like you said, free will and choice are a big part of the human condition and the human journey. What would you say to that question?
So I think it's a complicated question, and it has a particularly complicated answer. So I'll do my best to sort of sketch it out for you. So the blueprint part of this conversation recognizes, we talked about Ellie at the age of 0, she's born into a difficult context. And whether you identify with that or not, we can all agree that no one gets through life unscathed. We all have been exposed to um, unresolved inside of ourselves confusion and pain, things that have hurt us, things that have harmed us, and they leave kind of tangles in our physiology, or like a browser tab that's left open. They're left open because it doesn't make sense to us. Why was my mum like that? Why was my dad like that? Why did this thing happen at school? Why did that hurt so much? Those are questions that, unless we have the answer in a way that makes sense to us, the brain leaves that tab open. And so as we go through life, we accumulate more and more and more of those tabs until we hit a tipping point where there's too many tabs open and not enough bandwidth to kind of run our life. And that is a space that perhaps we traditionally call a midlife crisis. But we can have that crisis at any age where it's just like too much. Now, when a person is constructed uniquely to them, they're going to have a whole lot of questions in those browser tabs, so that the brain, if it could answer them, can basically file all of those questions and resolve them. Brains really like simple things. A plus B equals C. 1 plus 1 equals 2. And when a brain gets a complicated question that it can't file, it sits open. So then what tends to happen is we marry or partner with somebody who matches that pattern, because we are trying to make sense of what happened to us. Now, if that relationship is one where both people are committed to kind of figuring those things out, that can be a really healing experience. Because if we make us fictionally married again, Mark, I might bring my patterns to the table and you can hold them, and you can help me or hold the space while I work through them. And I close that browser tab, and then that piece of me kind of comes back online. I get back 1% of my energy because that tab is filed away. And if I can hold that space for you, then your browser tabs can get closed. That's best case scenario. That's what's called marriage mastery. And that is is available to all of us, but quite a big muscle and skill building process to genuinely be able to do that for your loved one 80% of the time. I'm never going to say 100% of the time, because that's just not realistic. But 80% of the time, that's where we're looking at from a mastery perspective. So we all have those. And then I think where your question is going is, why do other relationships feel mundane? And a simple answer, and not the only answer, but a simple answer is, a steady, healthy, good relationship might be coded as boring because it doesn't pattern match to what the brain wants to solve. And so that person doesn't connect in the way, or hold in that connection the way that perhaps other people might wish they would for us, or that even some part of us wishes it would. It just doesn't have enough magnetism, because the brain really loves cleaning itself up. And so those things don't compute. So that's that part of the question. Then the other part of the question you asked is, when we first get together, it's really exciting and we've been married for a long time. How do we recreate that excitement? And that is a concept called limerence. Now, limerence only happens up to 2 years into the relationship. And usually it ends within 9 to 18 months, but it can go as long as 2 years. And that's the bonding period where there's a lot of serotonin, a lot of dopamine, and that space is not sustainable for a relationship. And once a relationship has been through that, those bonding chemicals have bonded us to that person, we won't go through that again like that. And nor are we supposed to. So you and I have talked a little bit about the seasons and ages and stages of life and transitions. Where we want to phrase the question is not, how do I go back to that? but how do I go forward to something that feels nourishing, uplifting, kind, connected, calm, dynamic, words that resonate for the individuals, which again is attunement. What's important to you? What kind of relationship do you want to be in? And then from there, we start to look in that mastery space of what do we need to do or build in order to have access to that experience that you dream of.
Right. Thank you for answering. I know it was a difficult question to answer, but visually, like, the browsers, like I'm looking at my computer screen, I have browser windows open, right? And then you get too much and then it just spins, right? You can't compute. It's just too much. So I like how you broke that down. Did you say luminance? Am I saying that right? Say that one more time.
Yes.
That attaches
I
to
can't,
it.
hang on.
Limerence?
Yeah. Limerence, there's the word. I couldn't retrieve it just then under pressure. I was like, what word did I say?
Limerence.
Too many, yeah. Limerence.
Yeah, and that's why I love doing these shows, because I learn a lot. And would you say that there's something from your expertise? You always hear about the 7-year itch. You always hear about that 7, and then people either stay together or don't stay. Is there any truth to that from a psychology standpoint, or from the brain is fascinating. I've done many shows. We've talked and discussed about the brains, from neuroplasticity to dopamine to mindfulness. Is there anything, because you always hear about the 7-year itch, 7 years, and then it seems like people, start to realize, hey, I don't want to be with this person anymore. Or is there anything in your studies and all the education that you went through in your classes, did they talk about that, or did they give examples of that?
Look, 7 years is not, it's not a nothing, but in my N equals, I think I've worked with around 5,000 women. Most of them have been together longer than 7 years. So I feel like there's probably a cultural reference to that, which means it has some weight. Right. But I tend to work with people that have been together 20 plus years, to be honest. And we're really working in those very complicated blocks of time. That is a long period of time. And perhaps the cracks started to show around 7 years, for example, but I don't tend to get them at 7 years. I get them further down the line where it's really intricate and complicated.
Right. Yeah, and I thought I'd just ask that question because I think you nailed it on the head. It's more of a social, just people regurgitate, pass that on. But I was just curious in your studies if because you've studied a lot of the famous psychologists, and psychology is just a fascinating topic. If I had to do it over again, I would have probably gotten my degree in psychology versus business management and communications. But just for the sake of time, so through the chapters, you go to chapter 4 or chapter 5. She jumps to age 33, and it just continues on this story. But from the book, what exactly is HeartPrint, and how can someone reconnect if they feel lost or disconnected in life? And to get this book, what would you say to them as they're going through? Because you said it's a book, it's a story, but it's also a guide to help people understand the many variances of the human experience and relationships. What would you say to that?
Yeah. Well, I would say that I'm going to make us twins now, Mark. So no longer are we married. We're now moving into identical twin territory.
Okay.
Okay. Identical.
Okay. Identical.
So what that means is that in utero, you and I shared the same blastocyst that then split. So we have the same DNA. We look the same height, can't really tell us apart. And we went to the same schools, same family, same culture, same language. You and I are the same on so many levels, and yet our heart print is going to be completely different. And if we made ourselves identical triplets, for example, you would then have the 3 of us being 3 very different expressions of self. So nobody else is going to be like you, and nobody else is going to be like me. Even if we have so many things that are identical, we're still going to have a different expression of self. And so HeartPrint is all about, well, what's your expression of self? Because the thing is you never finish your exploration of self. You'll never get it done. And that is a really exciting idea, that right across your life, you're going to be learning and discovering even more aspects of yourself. Now, the thing that's most important about HeartPrint is that thread of connection back to your wise woman. In the book, we call her Elizabeth, and she is one of your translators of whether the life you're living matches your HeartPrint essence or not. And what we know is the greater the connection, your inside life, that your access to your HeartPrint, the way that matches your outside life, when we have that coherence, that's where we have contentment, satisfaction, fulfillment. That's where we have a sense that when I'm lovely and old and I look back on my life, that I've done a good job. And when I've had that experience of I've done a good job, that's when we know we've left a good legacy for our loved ones. We've left the world a better place than we found it because we modeled a life that was true to us. So we feel good about it, and we can exit this plane of existence, this planet, knowing that what we've left behind has left things exactly as we were kind of born to be, or at least the seed or the essence or the heartprint of who we are has been fully expressed. And that feels really wonderful. So you can find my book on barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. And if these are resonating with you, then the invitation relentlessly is, please listen to that inner voice that says, oh, she's talking about something that's important to me. Oh, that's resonant for me. Then taking a step towards doing that action is actually honoring who you really are. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and great reminder. That was one of the questions I was going to have for you. So you already covered that. Where can we get the book? And for the listeners out there, a lot of times when you listen to these podcasts and these shows, for me, it's the same thing. It's like when I'm watching certain shows, I get what I call the glimmers or those synchronicities or coincidences. Like, oh, that's what I've been asking about that, and then I get the answers. It's in the universe works with you in very mysterious ways. Especially through the concept of Einstein, who said this was the most complex 3.5-pound organism in the universe. So for you listeners out there, as you're getting these glimmers or these synchronicities of, what Meg is sharing with us today, get her book. And just for the last part of the show here, before we wrap up, Meg, want to give you an opportunity, maybe a practical step. Hold up your book again, show us the cover, why the cover, and maybe a practical step of, how people can move forward to the knowing themselves, to know thyself, and that authenticity. Is the dog related to you in any way?
Well, my friend has a dog of that breed, and I also just think dogs are very good
Animals
heartprint readers themselves, aren't they?
Animals are freaking amazing. Yeah, I get that. And that's why I wanted to show the cover. It's like a bottle of wine. I always ask, when I see a bottle, the label of the wine, I'm like, tell me about the story, because there's usually a story behind a book cover, a wine label, and what we do. But just for the last minute or so, just give us some a practical step to help people through this book, through your experiences and your storytelling in a cup of tea with Meg. Give us a practical step before we close, and what or who inspires you, Meg?
So a practical step is to find where you are in what I call heart, mind, body coherence. So that's where you're really connected, because essentially that's where your wise woman lives. So for me, every morning when I make a cup of tea, just the way I like it, and I get up early because I'm an early riser, and in that sort of dark, dim space, I have my cup of tea and I read my book and I have my space. That is me deeply connecting to who I really am. And I guess what my invitation first and foremost is, what's your version of that? And do you give yourself the gift of that experience as often as you can? Because that cup of tea can last 10 minutes for me. And sometimes it can last an hour, depending on who wakes up next in the household. That is something I can sort of hang my hat on. It's one of my grounding processes during the day. And if we slice our day thinner, how often do we give ourselves those experiences of a minute or two or 20 minutes where it's us in coherence with ourselves, where we can access that sense of belonging, contentment, satisfaction, connection to our inner wisdom. Because the more often we have access to that, the longer we stay in that across our day. Now, what happens is the longer that you stay in that space of inner wisdom and coherence, the more likely you are to build a life that matches who you are. So we're looking at 80% of the time being able to access that inner wise woman voice should you need that space and that experience. And the thing is once you've connected, you very much want to have that because you make decisions that take you towards the life and relationships of your dreams.
And that's what we want for everybody listening to the show today. Meg Tuohey, thanks for coming on. You can get the book at megtuohey.com, wherever the books are sold. You can get the information off of our social media platforms. Pleasure talking with you, my friend. Keep up the inspiring work and the great, encouraging, motivating work. If you write another book, come on Inspired Living, and we'll have another soul adventure and brilliant discussion. So thank you for being on Inspired Living today. Appreciate you.
I've had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. Put that hand over the HeartPrint. All right, listeners. As I always like to close the show, thanks for tuning in. And until our next soul adventure together, be kind, be caring, be compassionate. Most importantly, wherever you're at in this world, dare to dream, dare to explore, dare to live, discover the diamond within and the many hidden gems around. And we'll see you next time here on Inspired Living. Or as I like to say, namaste, namago.